Good morning. I'm used to saying good afternoon. Good morning, Maine. This is Chuck Ellis, and you're watching the Muddy Waters podcast. And I am your host. The Muddy Waters podcast, as you all know, exists to help the people of Maine better understand what is going on in our state. Unfortunately, a lot of the mainstream media doesn't want to cover everything that's happening in Maine, especially everything that is pertinent, which is why part of the reason that we exist, to give you a better understanding of what's going on by interviewing people like our honorable Bill Diamond, who has graced us today. So thanks for joining us today, Bill. I know you've got a busy schedule with everything going on, but thank you for taking the time to be on.
Of course. And Chuck, thank you for taking the time to do this. Our whole mission is to broaden the understanding, the awareness of what's happening with our child protection system.
Yeah. Absolutely, which we'll get into that a little bit more as we go along. But before we jump into that, so like I've been involved in Maine politics for only like 3 years, essentially. 2022. Prior to that, I paid attention to what was going on at the national scale. And again, one of the problems I have with the mainstream media, especially here in Maine, is everything seems to point you to, Donald Trump or what's happening at the national level. And people get so sidetracked and distracted. And I'm not saying that type of stuff is not important, but in comparison to like what's going on in your backyard, where you have a lot more capacity to have impact and change your world, and typically your local government actually has more power and control of your life. Instead, people are so focused, and I was one of those people who was so focused on what's going on nationally. As I started to get involved and I ran for office in 2022, one of the first names that I heard, because I was running in a district that overlapped with Gary Plummer, was your name. And the reason that Gary, he actually came out and did some door-to-door with me, and he's like, Bill Diamond said he was not going to run again, and so I'm running for state senate. And so that was how he was introducing himself to some of the people. And so your name, like I said, was one of the first names I heard as I started to get involved. And it sounds as though you've been involved in Maine politics for a long time. And I just wanted to give you an opportunity, because not a lot of the people who pay attention to my podcast are like the new people paying attention to Maine politics. Sure. Versus like the old school. And so some of them may not know who you are. So I just like an opportunity to talk about like what you've done in your past and kind of then lead into kind of more what we're going to talk about today.
Sure, and at a risk of not boring people, I'll try to condense it so it's
take a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I started out in education. I was a teacher and a principal and superintendent of schools, so that's my real professional background. I did that for 20 years, but in the middle of all that, I started as Gary Plummer did. You mentioned his name. I ran for the legislature when I was in 1976, when I was a principal of a school here in Windham, and decided that I could probably maybe have bigger impact on the problems I was seeing facing children and education in general, that if I actually got up there, maybe I could make a difference quicker. So I ran for the House, was fortunate enough to win, and then served 6 years in the Maine House of Representatives. And then I began thinking, you know what, I think most of the action takes place down in the Senate. I mean, the House proposes, but the Senate disposes, so to speak. Yep. So I went down there and I served down there for 8 years. And that was a good time. It was one of those things where I learned a lot. It was a different time back then. And I ended up not continual, but I ended up serving 20 years in the Maine Senate over a period of time. And as I say, not continual, but that was a real good experience. And also 8 years in the middle of that, I was Secretary of State. So I found myself in a number of different environments and different type of networks and new problems and different problems that were new to me, at least. And so it was a challenge. It's one of the things that I really enjoyed. But one of the things that struck me the hardest was throughout all that education and serving in the House and in the Senate was what I kept picking up more and more of, and that is how children in Maine were being abused and neglected. And mostly I focused on and was seeing a lot of children who were in state custody. And that was even more alarming to me, that sometimes our kids end up in the state custody and state protection, and that's not always the best for them. And so for a lot of different reasons. So in 2001, when Logan Marr, a 5-year-old, was killed by her foster mother, who was also happened to be a caseworker, We found out that, wow, that doesn't look right. Why is someone a caseworker and a foster parent at the same time? Come to find out, Sally Schofield was the person who we're talking about, and she did she killed little Logan by putting her in a high chair because Logan had some behavioral problems, but didn't deserve anywhere near what she got in terms of punishment. She put him in a high chair, put her in a high chair. She duct taped her to that high chair in the basement, facing a concrete wall. Pulled a blanket on a rope behind her, and then put 42 feet of tape on her, including her head and face, arms, legs, the whole thing. Well, Logan was obviously frightened. We learned it was really a terrible situation. High chair tips over and she suffocates. So that all leads me to say, how could that possibly happen? How could we have a foster parent also end up being, after being, or at the same time, being a caseworker? Caseworkers, as you know, investigate foster parents of what they're supposed to be investigating. Problem was, we found out, or I learned, is that this whole part of HHS was corrupt in that it was a good old boy system, good old girl system, where you could be doing what you want, and whether the people who are watching over you may not be watching over you, and that came to a head when Logan was taken from her mother, and she was allowed to have video conversations with Logan, her mother was, and 5-year-old Logan would say in those videos, "Sally hurts me, Sally hurts me." Well, people who would ordinarily investigate didn't investigate, and she was hurting her by punishing her and telling people how she could handle any kid. There was no kid too hard for her not to handle, and that ended up with Logan actually dying. Excuse me a minute. So that ended up with Logan actually ending up dead, and she shouldn't have. And when we found out even more the corruption going on in the department, that was under Governor King, by the way. And so this, by the way, these problems, I've worked with 4 different governors: King, Baldacci, LePage, and Mills. And there's nothing partisan about it. Every one of them have had serious problems. I will say, though, Governor Baldacci he recognized the problems he was stepping into with Logan Marr and the other issues, evidence that came up. And so during that investigation and during that trial, and by the way, I try to go to all the homicide trials of these children so I can see and hear and learn what's happened. And it's the only way you can find out. You can't rely on the press or anyone else. You got to spend a week or two in that hearing and listening to testimony under oath. So we found out again that when Baldacci came in, he saw what was going on, and he said, "Look, we have to reorganize this." He was the governor that actually was willing to do something, and he was the governor that put the extra H in DHHS. He brought Department of Health and Human Services together, and he did that because he thought he could divide it up and be more attentive to various sections, and that and some other reasons. And he was right. And he got national recognition. Problem was, it got so big so quick that it got out of control of him. And so when LePage came in, that HHS had a reputation of not doing a good job. So LePage came in and did what he thought was going to help the situation. But in the area of child protection, it didn't help. In fact, laying off people really compounded the situation. So then Governor Mills came in and taking over where, and during that time, by the way, Chuck, we had a lot of kids who were dying, who were very high, visibly victims. Those trials were just horrendous to go to. But we learned that by going to those trials, and we learned that unfortunately, the more kids that were dying, everything seemed to be falling together for the same thread, the same reason, and that being that whole culture was broken. And the whole system was broken. And so when I pondered away at it while I was in the Senate and realized just before I left, you know what, I'm not getting very far here. So when I left the Senate, I formed this nonprofit public foundation called Walk-A-Mile in Their Shoes. And what we do is we bring to the surface an awareness of the child protection system, how it's failing kids. And it was, as I say, it's been bad under independent, Democrat governor, a Republican, and then Democrat again. But the problem, the problem with the most recent administration, it's gotten worse. It's worse than the other three almost put together in terms of number of kids dying. I mean, we've had 148 children die in state care in the last 6.5 years. And these, again, are high profile cases. And the culture, again, is broken. The director of the Office of Child and Family Services, when our organization was formed, Chuck, one of the first things we did is we got to find out what the problems are, what's causing all this. So we took 10 months, and all we did is we went out and we talked to frontline workers. We talked to caseworkers who are working for the department. We talked to foster parents. We talked to law enforcement. We talked to daycare people. And we said 2 questions. What is the problem that you see in your area, and how can it be fixed? And that was the best thing we could have done, because that frontline information was not just some poll taken. That was real hardcore data. Although every one of those groups I mentioned were concerned about retaliation from the department. That's a very powerful, the most powerful agency in state government. And they have a lot of influence out there because they have a lot of contracts with a lot of different groups, and all of which depend on them for some sort of funding. So we found that retaliation was really heavy, especially in the foster care program and in the other areas. So I can get into any of those areas you'd like me to. I don't want to talk too long here by myself. Again, I want to make sure this is informative to people, but I'll rate this portion of it by simply saying that we found out, and then we reported on in December of 23. We had a report, and it's on our website, and it's called Unsupported. And it's all those groups that we talked about, and we really made it simplified and saying, here's a problem and here's a solution. And that has been a wonder. The department ignored that for a year, but I will say when we released this in December of 23, it was amazing because the director, most of this is mismanagement. The director, Todd Landry, resigned the next day after this came out, and he left same day. And we thought, well, that's good, because obviously people who work for him and others, they recognize that that's where one of the problems was. The problem is, instead of the governor appointing somebody who was totally new from away and bringing new ideas, she appointed his deputy, who had been there 28 years and had been part of the problem building over all this time. So we got the information out. That's been very helpful. And since then, we have been publicizing, raising money. We're all volunteers, by the way, except for we have a technical person.
Yep.
And we all do this out of the commitment we have to the cause. And so we raise money, and we go on TV and radio and tell people, we're here, call us if you've got problems, you've got kids you know are in danger, you've got relatives, whatever it may be, give us a call. And so that's been working fabulously. So that's kind of a nutshell of where I came from, how I got into this whole particular nonprofit, and what our real purpose is.
Yeah, well, I mean, I appreciate you sharing all that. I mean, that story is definitely heartbreaking of that one child. But as you kind of mentioned, there's like, I think the number you said was somewhere around 160 over the course of the last 6 years.
148. Yep.
148. Yeah. It just like the idea of that many children dying in the system, and just this lack of accountability. And you kind of mentioned that like there are problems with all the governors that you've worked under as you've been noticing this issue, but like, you know, especially once that report comes out, I mean, the idea of like not hiring somebody from the outside to fix the program, but hiring somebody who's part of the problem, and then praising that the department, I think is one of the other things that you'd mentioned where I met you, is when you gave a larger presentation about this. It just blows my mind. And you mentioned too that this is nonpartisan. This should be nonpartisan, right? This should not be a thing that like, this should not be even a political thing. This should just be like, how do we help the kids? How do we take care of the kids? And so anyway, I think that like, obviously we shouldn't be trying to be partisan about this, but I also, there was a comment that you know, how receptive, I guess, because I was kind of surprised, and I made the comment to you, I was thanking you, being that you're a Democrat, lifetime Democrat, served for however many years in the House and the Senate and the Secretary of State as a Democrat, were willing to come and meet with a group of Republicans, and just really in a day when we don't really have a lot of bipartisanship on a lot of issues. It's nice to have some of that. And I guess one of the questions I have for you is, again, most of my people are conservative. How well received are you by the Democrats at this point?
That's a great question, Chuck. I'll tell you that the Democrats have not been that receptive, and part of the reason is they're looking at it through a partisan lens, and they're looking at it. Well, listen, we have a Democratic governor, we have a Democratic legislature, and we have a situation here where we don't want to really expose them. We really don't want to be part of any kind of a system that chastises them what they're doing, so they stay silent. And but unfortunately for them, their silence is now screaming loudly. For example, when the governor, when the director of Office of Child and Family Services, the newest one, Bobby Johnson, she had a vote taken. Her employees voted this past winter, 145 of them, no confidence in her ability to protect them and protect the kids. And that was released around noontime. And it wasn't 2 hours later that the governor was out, as was the new commissioner, because the other commissioner resigned as well. The new commissioner and the governor both stood solidly shoulder to shoulder saying what a great job this director that was doing, and that this no confidence vote was unfair and inappropriate. But then not one word was said about these kids who are dying, not one single word. But the minute one of the bureaucrats was chastised by their own employees, I might add, they were there to defend her. So that's a system that's not recognizing, not willing to admit the system is broken. And frankly, I place that right on the lap of the governor.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. And I like, just as like, and again, I sometimes I don't have the data to back up what I'm about to say, but I think it's likely true anecdotally. I would suggest, generally speaking, that people who work in government and people who work in a lot of nonprofit types of situations, a lot of them tend to be Democrats. Actually, I would be surprised to find that, like, probably 80%, 70, 80% of the people who are working for DHHS are probably, and these people who are giving this vote of no confidence, they're probably, I mean, there's a high probability that they're Democrat. I mean, we're a state that's probably 55, 60% Democrat anyway. And so the point that I'm getting at is, like, this like, the people who are looking at this and saying that there's a problem, this is not a partisan issue, but like you said, the people who are in power, like, well, we can't speak negative about, we can't admit that we're doing anything wrong. And, like, I don't care which party you are. I'm a Republican, but if that's coming from my side of the aisle, I'm not liking it either. Right. I don't think that, like, it's not okay. It's not appropriate to, like, just defend your gang. Gang mentality is bad on both sides. And it's just mind-boggling that when children are at risk, and I know people, people close to me, I'm not going to go into too much detail because of the fear of retaliation, right, that are dealing with this system, and it is a nightmare.
Yes.
It's a nightmare. It's so mismanaged, and there are a lot of good people working there that really care about the kids and are really trying to protect the kids, and to have them not have the support from leadership. Like, what blows my mind is, like, Democrat voters, where are they, like, holding their legislators and their governor accountable, right? I mean, the Republicans are happy. They're like, oh my gosh, this is something that we can get mad at Janet about and we can use against her. But we want to win in 2026. And so there's an element of the political game that's understandable, but, like, we should all be furious about this regardless of political party and hold our people accountable. Like, if Democrats who care about kids, have them reach out to their legislators, because we need to do something about this.
And you're absolutely right, Chuck. And the problem is, or we found our role becoming, is letting people know, building awareness to this problem, because they've been able to survive with keeping the curtain closed. Even when in 2021, I asked the Government Oversight Committee, which is a unique committee. They meet year round. They have subpoena power, all of this. And I asked them to investigate the Office of Child and Family Services because of all these deaths. In 2021, we had 34 kids die. 34. So I asked them to, and they started that investigation in August of that year, and then it carried on for 3 years. And during those investigations, the department did everything they could to stonewall information, deflect information. They anything but cooperative. And in fact, the commissioner at the time, Lambro, she did her best to get the committee to stop investigating them. She did that behind the scenes, but it didn't work because that committee is a really a bipartisan committee, truly, in that there were 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans, and they don't. So nobody has an advantage there. But the real story behind all of that is they have not, and they are still not cooperating the way they should. When the committee asked, we want to see some of the cases that these kids have just died, and they've already had, they've had their court hearing and all of this. We need to see the inside, all the information that you had, and they refused to give it to them. So the committee had to go to court, Superior Court, to try to get that, and then the court sided with the governor, of course, and then the department. But that all of that says that they've worked, they've survived, they've been able to continue on as by not talking about it, pretending it's not there, and the media hasn't really grabbed much of it, and especially the print media. So they've kind of gotten by. But I think now, after 2.5 years, we've got to the point where people know who we are now. They know we're there. We get 6 or 8, maybe sometimes 10 calls a week about concerns about certain kids. And we are, including the most recent one, the Lewiston death of the 4-year-old boy that was shot. So we're getting all of this now, and I think the people are getting it. They're hearing and understanding, and they're outraged. But we need to do more of that. And by the way, your podcast is one more thing we do, and we appreciate you letting us come aboard because we want people to know what's happening, and we tell them facts. And I was a bureaucrat for 8 years, Secretary of State, and I understand what bureaucrats, how they think. And they think mostly is we've got to protect ourselves here because otherwise we're going to be exposed. And if something goes wrong, who knows what that means? So I understand all that. It doesn't mean I agree with it. I tried not to do that, but I'm not pointing myself as anybody special. But when you're Secretary of State, you better not be partisan, or people are going to pick up on it really, really quick. So I really felt that I really feel that we're making some headway, and it's all based on increasing the awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I think that, and that's why, like, when I heard your story, I was like, well, I got to get this, onto the podcast and get as many people as possible to learn about it. So people who are watching, make sure you share this. We're going to go ahead and next and watch a little video. That's one of the commercials. It's the shorter of the 2 commercials that you guys have to kind of give you a little bit more of a sense of what this is all about. So we're going to do that now.
In Maine, the system meant to protect our children, the most important job of all, continues to fail.
The Maine Department of Health and Human Services has been sued twice for its failures and mistreatment of children in foster care. The department was found non-compliant in 94% of the cases in child safety and child neglect. Maine's independent watchdog agency just reported continued failures regarding child safety, including placing children in homes of registered sex offenders. Walk-A-Mile on Issues is offering to help fix this broken system and save our children. Our children are continually being neglected, abused, and even murdered at record numbers. This could all end for these children if everyone, including you, would demand change. This has to stop. Our children need us. Enough is enough.
Learn more at walkamilemaine.org. That's walkamilemaine.org.
Yeah, some of those things are just hard to hear. That's a great, like, real quick commercial, and there's I'll try to post a link to the other longer one that gets into a little bit more detail, but just some of those quick details in there that I had forgotten about, and every time I watch it, I'm reminded of the idea, like, children are literally being murdered. We know that. We talked about that that horrific story that you had mentioned earlier, and then, like, the idea that children are being placed into homes of child sex offenders, sex offenders, is just, like, absolutely insane, and we definitely need change here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, those kids, I can tell you horror stories about every one of them. And But the commonality, the common denominator with every one of those trials and every one of those kids that died is that they didn't have to die, and they shouldn't have. For example, Maddox Williams, a little boy in 2021, you know that story. And that's a case where, the department, his mother abandoned him. It was very obvious she didn't want him. She had lost all of her children one time or another. She abandoned him. She wanted him back because that was a resource for her. And so the department says, okay, we're going to put him back with the mother, who was a convicted felon, by the way, a gun felon, among other things. And the whole thing centered on the fact that they wanted to reunify if they could, because there's a benefit to that. The more reunification, if they get to be 40% and maintain that, then the feds give them some sort of financial reward for that. So reunification dominated, and he was put back in over the objections of almost everybody who knew the situation. Parents, grandparents, neighbors, everybody. And he was put back in that home, Chuck, and 3 months later he was dead. And that's he was a healthy, loving child living with his grandmom, Victoria Vos, and he was actually stomped to death. She weighed 200 pounds. He weighed 27. And she used to tell him when he's lying on the couch, turn around and face the other way. I don't want to look at your effing face because you're so ugly. And then she would beat him. She would hit him. She knocked his teeth out, his back teeth, not the front teeth so much. That takes some doing. She knocked out his teeth. She bruised all over. She would put these little cartoon tattoos over the bruises on his face so that people wouldn't see the bruise itself. She did all these demented sorts of things. Thank God she was committed of depraved indifference murder and serving 50 years in prison. But she did the saddest part of that is he never should have been murdered, never should have been back in that home. And I can tell you case after case after case where that's happened. And by the way, they sent a wellness team to her trailer where she lived with him and to see how he was doing. Of course, he was covered with bruises. We saw his body right after that in the morgue at the trial. And he was covered with bruises, but the person who came in said, well, he looks okay. The room was darkened. He had a blanket over him and everything looks okay. So they turned around and left. That scenario happens all the time. And that's what we're trying to say. Look, I mean, they quickly blamed the caseworker, but the caseworker was under so much pressure. They had to get in and get out and go to the next one. And that does not excuse that slack of attention. But the fact of the matter is the management was really where the problem lied. And that's where the whole problem had to be resolved, is getting that management straightened out. So Maddox is he's like the poster child for this whole thing.
Yeah, so it's like the point that you make is a valid one, right? Like, who's to blame in this situation? Well, I like to quote V for Vendetta. It's obviously there are those who are more responsible than others, and then he says they will be held accountable, and let's hope that happens. Like, and that's the people at the top, but the people who are there, they are responsible, but they're like, when you have a systemic problem all across your organization, just blaming like the individuals that are on the ground, the leadership is really putting, as you said, a ton of pressure to jump from this to this to this to this. And there's another piece that I think plays into this, and I think that the leadership has a vested interest in that you had mentioned. I think it's harder to completely just blame the caseworkers. Again, there's enough blame on their feet, and there's blood on their hands, and nobody's taking that away. But the ultimate blame lies at leadership. In this situation, the ultimate blame lies at the leadership that refuses to put in new effective leadership. That's Janet Mills, right? So. When one of the things that you had mentioned was like when you get at the why, right? We asked the question, like, why are they putting children back in the homes with these types of parents, given the obvious risks at such a high rate? I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah, we looked into that and we found that it was an incentive. I mean, this is an ideology for one thing. I mean, at one point it was an ideology that, it was somewhat romantic even. We want to get these kids back with their parents. And no one disagrees with that.
Right.
But there has to be an evaluation done. Is that putting that kid in a safe situation? And they continually put kids in unsafe situations. We have in Maine, which I really should mention, we have an independent child welfare ombudsman, and her job is when people call her and give her information about there's something going on, the kids aren't safe. She looks into it. That's her job and her staff to look into those cases. For 4 years in a row, she has an annual report. For 4 years in a row, that annual report has said the same thing. The department still puts kids in unsafe situations. I mean, that is something, that's a basic responsibility that should not be an issue at this point. They should know safe from unsafe. So when you got somebody who is a domestic violence perpetrator, like there's a little boy, 32 days old, Silas Melvin, up in Milo, and Silas Melvin, his biological father, was a domestic violence, and he would beat the mother. They weren't married. He'd beat the mother. He told everybody, including the department, he was going to kill the whole family, and nothing was done. He wasn't removed from the home. So he went on and on. He'd have these outrages. He broke down the door once, and he beat up his wife again, and he beat up another woman who was in jail for that for a while. Anyway, he ended up killing the little boy at 32 days. Now, a 32-year-old baby is very tiny, 100% vulnerable, and he didn't just throw the baby out of frustration. He beat and punched the kid so bad that it fractured and burst his inner organs and their brain bleeds. So he should never have been in that house. He was a domestic violence perpetrator, proven, and they never took him out. They let him stay there.
I feel like at this point, I'm getting to the place where I'm like, I don't just think that we need people to be removed from their positions. I think people in DHHS that are in charge of this organization that are causing this to happen should be put in prison. Like, are you kidding? Like, you're allowing that type of stuff to happen. There's got to be some level of accountability.
Yeah.
Like more than just a little bit of negative press. But unfortunately, the mainstream media is ignoring it. Your general news here in Maine is largely ignoring this. But like, what in the world? I mean, sure that got a little article, a little write-up, but like there should be like extreme pressure. Like, how in the world is that story not out? Like the fact that I'm just learning about that story frustrates me, right? Like like these types of stories are the type of thing that the media needs to be reporting on. That's actually their job.
Right. We'd love to have an investigative arm of some of these media places, especially the print news, but they don't. And again, it appears to us that they really don't want to step on the governor's toes, and they let this thing go by. Although I have to say that the most recent death of that 4-year-old Jasper Smith in Lewiston, that was a gun death. We don't know. The state police still investigating it, but her family, immediate family, her brother, her sister-in-law of the bio mom contacted us, and we met with them for 2 hours last Friday, and they told us everything that was going on. And that we learned from what they told us is that the department was called in to do investigations into that home 7 different times. And they went in 7 different times, and each time their result was no findings. But we learned from the immediate relatives that the place was a mess. The kids weren't being taken care of. There was a 2-year-old that spent most of her time in a playpen. They have a little 7-month-old, which is really vulnerable. And that all these people who came who said, you got to go in and check this, and nothing ever really happened. I mean, that's the kind of, and thank God they contacted us.
Yeah.
They contacted
absolutely.
us so we could bring it to the surface, because that's our job, is to bring this to the surface and get the press inquiring as to what really happened. So again, that little Silas Melvin, that little 32-day-old infant, I mean, his death was horrific. They all are. But I have to tell you that I'm afraid there's more sitting at the doorstep, because I don't see any really change in philosophy.
Yeah.
And that has to change. I mean, you got the ombudsman saying what she's saying every year. You got an inspector general from the United States saying the department is not following safety rules and requirements 94% of the time. And you had two lawsuits. We were sued by the Department of Justice and sued by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for not taking care of kids, for giving foster kids psychotropic drugs, all these kind of things. And all this comes in and you say, my word. And remember, those lawsuits were by the Biden administration, a Democratic administration, suing a state Democratic administration. That doesn't happen very often.
No, not especially not today, right? Like,
especially
I mean,
not today.
We're one of the most divided that we've ever been. Obviously, we at one point had a civil war, but besides that, I don't know how in my lifetime we've never been as divided as we are now. And so, for in this point where we are, that to have a Democratic president sue our governor, our state, is absolutely crazy. So here's a question for you, real quick, because I'm curious about this, like as secretary, so like obviously Janet Mills could fix this by bringing somebody new in and demanding accountability, right? That's a possibility. But also, is there anybody else in her administration? Is this something, for instance, that would fall, like, could the Secretary of State do something about this? I'm not saying would she, I'm saying could she?
Not really. That's not really part
Okay.
of the Secretary of State's realm.
Okay,
I mean,
that's
to get involved in that. But the Attorney General, but he's not going to do anything that goes against the governor. Believe me.
He's too busy suing oil companies that don't operate in Maine.
Well, besides that, there's an innate partnership. Yeah, there's an innate partnership there that he's not going to go against. Unlike when Governor Mills was Attorney General, she went against LePage on a regular basis, which from time to time looked like it was a healthy thing to do. But you don't have that now, and that's not what's going on. So, yeah, I mean, the thing, Chuck, that's the worst. I mean, the good news is we're making progress with awareness. And we're getting people come to us. This Lewiston family never would have come to us if they didn't know we existed and the reputation we have of digging things out. And people now are starting to read the report that's been available now for a couple of years. And so, I mean, all of this means that I think we're making headway. Although, having said that, I think the current administration is saying we're not going to do anything. We're just going to ride this thing out and let the next governor come in and do anything. By the way, which is why I'm still in the process of asking everybody who's running for governor, Republican and Democrat, if you want to learn the real problems that are happening with child protection and you want to do something about it, if it's a top priority, we will sit with you and we'll tell you the whole story. And we'll tell you some solutions that are possible, and you may want to use other solutions. But we'll give you that. We'll tutor you to make you become as close to an expert as you'll ever become, if you want that. And a couple of people have taken us up on it already. We're hoping that others will. So,
can you name names of who has so far? I want to give them kudos.
Garrett Mason. We spent some time with him, a lot of time with him. He came in with real good questions. What about this? What about that? So I think that was an hour and a half conversation, which was, I think he left a lot better informed. Jim Libby contacted me. I'm going to meet with him next Monday, and we're going to go over all these things because he wants to know what's happening on the inside. I've not heard back from Bobby
Charles.
Bobby Charles. I sent an invitation that I'd be happy to sit down with him. I sent him off to Troy Jackson. I'll be doing some of the other Democrats as well. So I'm hoping that these people will take this seriously, because if we don't do something with the next governor, Chuck, then it's going to be a long road to get kids safe in the state of Maine.
Well, my hope, obviously, as a Republican, and given the state of the Democrat Party, because I actually think that one of the problems that we have right now is I wonder if you don't have to share about this, but it would seem to me, if I had been a long-term Democrat, especially with the approach that you have, I would be looking at the Democrat Party of today and asking, what the heck is going on? Like, this is not the Democrat Party of the past. And unlike the Republican Party has problems, and I think you would probably point some out, but at the very least within the Republican Party, there is this ability to disagree, freedom of speech, freedom of thought, for instance, and diversity of thought definitely exists within the Republican Party. I've really only been involved for a while, last 3 or 4 years, but it seems like that's something that continues to exist in the Republican Party. So I'm hopeful because of that. that Republicans will get elected, and we can turn the legislature and, if possible, the governor's race, because I'm concerned that when I look at the top candidates on the Democrat side in particular, I think we're going to get more of the same if one of them is elected. So there's a lot that I just threw in there, but I'll let you.
I mean, that's right. But I would remind you and your listeners as well and viewers is that we had the same problem with the LePage administration. They did not want us inside there. We had the same problem eventually with the Baldacci, although I have to give John credit. He really was willing to change things. And the King administration, there was only a couple of years left. And so with them, it was still, though, the curtain was pulled tight. And under the current administration, there's not only a curtain, but there's a wall behind the curtain. So you're right in that we're hoping for some change. I'm hoping for a change. And if a Democrat gets elected, a Republican gets elected, I want to make sure that they're willing to commit to taking care of this problem. Because I'll guarantee you this, if the current governor said, we're going to solve this problem right today, and here's what we're going to do. By the end of my term next year, this is going to be 80% better and on our way to getting 100% better. And if she wanted to do that, she could. But that would be admitting that there's been some serious issues, not the least of which under her administration have been really the most severe of all. And that's saying a lot, Chuck, because don't forget, under the LePage administration, we had Marissa Kennedy, who was beaten by her stepfather and mother on a regular basis for months. They'd make her get down on her knees on a tile floor, hold her arms above her head, and beat her with a mop handle, and then throw her into a 100% dark closet for 2 or 3 hours. And he was a man of probably 6'5" and weighed probably 350 pounds. He was a big, big monster. I was sitting probably 8-10 feet from him in the trial, and that little girl must have been totally, totally frightened to death when she saw him come in. By the way, when they finally did a home visit after the neighbors and the police and the school, they all complained. The department came in and sent a caseworker in, and the caseworker, who was a subcontractor, said, well, and while she was there, Marissa passed out. And they said, the caseworker testified and said, well, Julio, the stepfather, was so charming, I couldn't imagine he would do anything wrong. And so she left with that attitude. So all of that comes together that says, this system is bad. It's been broken. And I'll certainly be the first one to say it's worse now than it's ever been. But I hope, like you, that we have to get a change. We have to get somebody that's going to come in and at the gubernatorial level, and they have to be made to commit to this one way or another.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, obviously, whoever gets in, regardless of what party, I hope that this is something that needs to be addressed. And what's interesting is we'll throw this out there just for fun to throw it at Janet. There are rumors that there are these polls going out by people to determine who would win in a straight up match between Janet Mills and Susan Collins. So there's a lot of rumors swirling that she's going to run for Senate or whatever. If she really wants to do that, it would look really good for her if she fixed this problem. Again, this is an issue that I would look at it and I would say, on the one hand, tactically, because I want to get Republicans in office, there's a part of me that says I let her keep ruining things and it will set us up for success. The other part of me says, but there are children at risk here. There are children's lives. And so even though I want to win, I want children to be protected more. So Janet, here's your opportunity. Fix the problem and it'll put your party in the best position to be able to win in 2026. If you don't do it, it's gonna be tough, and because this is one of a number of issues that fall into that she has the opportunity to fix right now, and they're just not doing it. And I agree with you that this is not like a problem that's just limited to the Republican the Democrat Party, but I do have a lot more faith in the Republican Party to actually address this, and I will if we get a Republican in there, be sure to hold their feet to the fire. I will use every ounce of my strength to because I do want I don't want my side, quote unquote, to win because I'm on it, right? I want them to win because I actually believe that it's going to give us the best chance of addressing the real problems that are affecting Mainers. And if my side ends up not being that, then they won't be my side anymore. If that makes sense.
Well,
like I'm not.
That's what I've determined. I mean, I could care less about partisan politics now. In fact, with my nonprofit is a 501c3, and you know what that means. Of course, it can be no partisan favors or involved. And I really could care less. I mean, I've done the partisan thing enough. And even when I was in the legislature, I tried to be, listen to both sides. But that's irrelevant right now. If these gubernatorial candidates, I really want to keep their feet to the fire, as you just said, and make them say, yes, this is important, and I pledge that I will do everything I can to fix this issue. And well, we got two of them. One I've already done, another one next week with Jim, and then hopefully maybe the Democrats will want to talk with me too. Although I'm not their favorite person right now. But again, I could care less.
Yeah, well, again, that's on them, and this is kind of my point that I'm kind of getting at with the current state of the Democrat Party is like this is a problem, and I actually believe in the I don't. There are a lot of people that want multiple parties, whatever. I'm okay with two parties because I feel like within the parties you have all these different segments. So if you're like, well, I don't exactly 100%, well, nobody does. You have so many different variations of what it means to be a Republican. There are libertarian Republicans. There are Democrats that are more libertarian, right? We have all these different varieties, and I don't think we need official party headings in order to make it work. But what I do think is that the Democrat Party is broken right now, and it needs to lose in order for it to realize that it needs to fix itself. And that's my personal belief on that.
Well, the problem with that is, though, Chuck, is that these are the same people who have been there for the most part, and they got reelected. They got reelected at margins of safe margins in the House and the Senate, and then Governor Mills got reelected. So it's unlike the national scene where there was a turnover. Maybe I don't know if Maine's going to be a couple of years behind that or not, but we're going to make sure this issue at least has a stake in what the discussions come around to, and that people realize it's one that the people are outraged about it now, and they're getting more and more outraged every day, and they better give this the respect that it needed and fix this problem.
Well, I'm going to be sure to ask every single. I'm willing, by the way, just for the record, to interview anybody on this podcast. It's like helping people know what's going on. So, whether they're Democrat, Republican, I will interview them and treat them, fairly, and ask them real questions, not just softball questions. And I will ask all of them about what they're going to do to fix this problem. Excellent. So if you end up talking to any of them, let them know. I'd love to have them on. I actually have Garrett Mason coming on next week. So that'll be a good one.
Well, he'd be a good one to talk to this about, because as I say, he was real sincere about getting into this. I know that I don't know if Sean Moody's going to run or not, but I know Sean is serious about this. I've talked to him a lot. He's been a big supporter of our efforts. So good for you. Thank you for doing that. All they have to do is look at this report, and it's a cheat sheet, and all they have to do is go online and take a look at that, walk-a-mile-maine.org, and they'll be able to tutor themselves. But I'd rather sit down and give them the background information which they would need.
Yeah. As a reminder, walk-a-mile-maine.org down bottom. If you want to learn more, if you want to reach out, you can get in touch with Bill through that. And you can also give, I assume, to this organization right on that website if you want to help protect our kids, which we all should. Even if we can't afford to give, we can share the story and let people know what's going on and hold literally everybody should reach out to their legislator, their state senate, and send a message to the governor. This is absolutely ridiculous that this is happening, and there's no accountability.
Chuck, I have one last thing. If I could just take another 30 seconds.
Go for it.
You might have heard of Maine Cabin Masters.
Yep.
They've been on TV for 10 years, and now they're highly popular. And they've endorsed us, and they're doing a fundraiser for us on June 14th at their site in Manchester, Maine. And it's been a wonderful success so far getting the sponsors for this. And they're providing all the food, all the beer tents, all the games for the kids in the afternoon. They're doing everything. And so we're thrilled that Maine Cabin Masters And we have a band, the Ocean House Road Band out of Cape Elizabeth. They're donating all of their time to this event because that's what the evening's going to be as a band. So go online if you want to get a ticket. Just come and we'll sell you a ticket at the door. I'd love to have everybody come, and we thank those people for helping us as much as they have at this point.
All right, thanks, Bill. We'll try to get that up. I'm also the chair of the Cumberland County Republicans. I'll try to see if I can get that event put up so people can get reminded of it from our website. So thank you so much for doing that, and thanks for coming on. And everybody, thanks for watching. If you want to support the podcast, obviously, if you have money to give, I would say give it to Walk-A-Mile Maine. But this is a podcast that I don't make any money on, so I'm hoping to lose less money because I do spend money for it. So if you want to support the podcast, you can go to muddywaters.us. You can buy some of our nice, sweet merch and maybe wear it around and have conversations as a result of it. There's also some nice mugs, so you can sip your morning coffee while listening to or watching the Muddy Waters podcast. So thank you all for watching again, and we'll see you back again later this week with our next guest. And I don't know who that is off the top of my head, but we'll be here. All right. Thanks so much again.
Thanks, Chuck. Appreciate your help.